Universal basic income is something that everyone has been talking about ever since the tech bros started saying that their next generation AIs will make everyone useless. Except them, of course. In all seriousness, the fact of the matter is that AI will disrupt many existing jobs. And this begs the question of what's needed to minimize this disruption, at least until the next generation of jobs comes around. Today, we take a close look at one controversial answer to guarantee a minimum amount of money to every person each month. As you can imagine, this apparent solution may create much bigger problems, and it may not even be needed. Stay tuned. Believe it or not, but the idea of a universal basic income, or UBI, is a very modern one. Although the concept of giving a minimum amount of money to every person has been around for thousands of years, it seems it was mostly only discussed in the context of crime. Give people money so they stop stealing. The reason for this was probably because of corporal punishment. Petty crimes, like theft, often resulted in the thief losing a limb or indeed their life. This was a bit excessive for some philosophers who tried to find ways to reduce crime rather than challenge the norm of using cutting and killing as the cure-all. As a fun fact, it's not poverty that causes crime, but relative poverty. The bigger the wealth gap, the more crime you get. But that's a topic for another time. Anyways, it wasn't until the 18th century that UBI started being discussed in the context of supporting people due to changes in the economy. This is not surprising, given that this was when the first industrial revolution happened. It was the first time that jobs were disrupted by technology on a large scale. This technology consisted of new machines and manufacturing processes that could do the work of dozens of people with a single operator, especially in industries like farming. For reference, most people worked in agriculture prior to the first industrial revolution, so this was quite a big deal. The disruption to existing jobs accelerated in the 19th century during the second industrial revolution, which basically added things like electricity and chemistry to the manufacturing processes from the first industrial revolution. By the 20th century, discussions around UBI were becoming more commonplace. This was simply because a growing number of people were having their jobs disrupted by technology. The catch is that because most of these technologies were physical and involved operating machinery, it was quite easy for most people to find new employment in the growing field of manufacturing. The result was that the discussions around UBI never really materialized into policy, just because the job disruptions weren't that big. It's a similar story with the third industrial revolution, which began at the end of the 20th century and essentially involved adding computers and the internet to the existing mix. This transition, likewise, wasn't very disruptive to the job market. People just went from working with a machine to working with computers that controlled the machines. And because the economy was growing so much thanks to the post-war population boom, there were lots of new jobs to go around. Since the start of the 21st century, however, people have started wondering whether the next industrial revolution could be the one that finally disrupts the job market. This is because, over the last couple of decades, there have been significant advances in artificial intelligence, robotics, and gene editing. Logically, if you put all these ingredients together, it theoretically becomes possible to replace the need for humans in the existing chain of labor. So, instead of having a human working with a computer that controls a machine, you would have some sort of artificial intelligence working on the computer instead. In other words, the next industrial revolution could cut humans completely out of the equation. Obviously, this next industrial revolution is being referred to as the fourth industrial revolution, and there's been lots of debate about whether it's begun and what it consists of. As you may know, Klaus Schwab, the now former chairman of the World Economic Forum, is, or was, the one steering this revolution. For those unfamiliar, the World Economic Forum, or WEF, consists of the world's most powerful individuals and institutions, ranging from presidents to megacorporations. The WEF's version of the Fourth Industrial Revolution effectively involves replacing us plebs with perfectly obedient androids. This makes the WEF's version of the Fourth Industrial Revolution inherently anti-human. But, well, that's also a topic for another time. And by the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Apologies for the interruption, folks, but if you're looking to get the very best information about altcoins and become part of the most welcoming community in crypto, then we have just the place for you. The Coin Bureau Club is where you can find our unrivaled altcoin reviews. Every week we cover a different low-cap altcoin project, and these reviews are the best in the business. No one digs as deep as we do into these projects, and we share all the info we find with our members. There's tons more besides our reviews though. You'll also get access to our exclusive research feed where I and other key Coin Bureau team members share alpha, our thoughts on the market, and more in real time. You'll get to see what we all hold in our portfolios, and there's an exclusive members Discord as well. This is the place where you can chat directly with us, ask questions, and meet fellow crypto enthusiasts. The community there is the best you will find in the crypto space. Everyone is welcome, and you can talk crypto 24/7 if you so desire. There are loads of other benefits to being a Coin Bureau Club member too, so if you're interested, check out the link in the description below. And now, back to the video. Now, regardless of what entities like the WEF want the fourth industrial revolution to be, the fact of the matter is that it is coming in some capacity. That's because artificial intelligence, robotics, and gene editing will continue to evolve, and this will eventually disrupt the economy along with our jobs. This has made UBI a hot topic in recent years, and it seems that the hype, or horror, began in 2019 when Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang promised to introduce UBI if elected in 2020. This so-called freedom dividend would give $1,000 to every American adult every month with nothing required of them in return. With over 260 million American adults, this would cost over $260 billion per month, totaling over $3.1 trillion per year. Now, at first glance, it seems impossible that this kind of program could ever work. Upon closer inspection, however, Andrew's UBI proposal makes, or made, a surprising amount of sense. Andrew's UBI proposal was partially based on an existing UBI program that's been available in Alaska since the 1970s. The Alaska Permanent Fund takes a portion of the profits made from the state's oil companies and shares it with every Alaskan once per year. Last year's payment was around $1,500. Now, Andrew's reasoning was that big tech companies are the new big oil companies and that data is the new oil. As such, his UBI proposal could and should be paid for by the big tech companies. And this makes more sense than you might think, because big tech companies are in fact sitting on unbelievable amounts of cash. At the end of last year, a dozen tech companies collectively held over $1 trillion of cash on their balance sheets. This enormous money pile is a consequence of the fact that most tech companies make incredible amounts of revenue but have minimal expenses. They also pay very little tax, allegedly. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, this $1 trillion cash pile would only be enough to sustain Andrew's freedom dividend program for a few months, and that's assuming all of it was somehow taxed. Even so, it highlights the fact that a very small group of people are reaping most of the profits of technology. Moreover, it underscores the fact that this group is going to become even smaller and even wealthier as technological advancement continues. And funnily enough, this is something that OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has been saying for years, and it's why he's been supportive of UBI as one possible solution. The funny thing about Sam's approach to UBI is that he believes it could be paid for by creating an AI which can generate profits, be it by trading or otherwise, and then sharing these profits with everyone. Realistically, though, whoever develops this AI would probably keep those profits for themselves. I mean, that's literally what's been happening with all this AI stuff so far. If you think about it, the only way Sam's AI trader idea would work would be to have some community-owned or state-owned AI that generates profits which it then shares with the community or citizens respectively. This actually isn't far off from the sovereign wealth funds found in countries like Norway. If that term is unfamiliar, Some governments took the Alaska model to the next level by using taxes and revenues from state-owned enterprises to invest in productive assets over the years. The result is that these governments have trillions of dollars of reserves to support their citizens financially if need be. Now, while giving an AI the power to play with this money is out of the question for the time being, it nonetheless proves that it is possible to fund a program like UBI without breaking the government's bank or crushing business competition. We'll come back, though, to whether UBI is even required later in the video. For now, though, let's assume that there is a way to make the maths work. Let's assume that there is a way to pay for a freedom dividend type UBI program without taxing big tech out of the territory or bankrupting the government by borrowing trillions. The bad news is UBI could actually make the existing wealth trends much worse. Specifically, UBI could result in an even greater concentration of wealth in even fewer hands. This ultimately depends on what's being done with the money that's being given out. If most of it is being spent on things like mobile phones and other gadgets, then it would just make big tech even bigger than it is now. At the other extreme, if most of the UBI money was used to pay down debts, then it could paradoxically result in deflation. This fundamentally depends on how the UBI is funded. If it's taken from taxes, then it would, in fact, result in deflation, as redistributed money would go towards paying down debts. As a fun fact, when debt is paid down, money is destroyed. And when the supply of money decreases, then the purchasing power of the money that remains increases, meaning things get cheaper and life becomes more affordable. In theory, this is a good thing and should probably be the endgame of any UBI program. The problem is that in practice, this is in fact a very bad thing because this deflation would make debts more expensive. In turn, this would cause all the powerful individuals and institutions who took on trillions of dollars of debt to default, forcing them to sell the assets that they bought with all that borrowed money. It's safe to say that can't be allowed to happen, hence why deflation is evil and inflation is inherently good, or so we're told. But this all assumes that UBI would be paid for by taxes and spent on repaying existing debts. If UBI is paid for by money printing instead and spent on products and services provided by megacorporations, well, it becomes yet another method of funneling money from the poor and the middle class to the rich. This is presumably why so many billionaires are fans of UBI. They know they wouldn't have to pay for it, they know where that money will be spent, and they know it means they will get richer. At the same time, though, some seem to be aware of the possibility that UBI could paradoxically cause their profits to fall. This is because of the effects that UBI could have on productivity, and this is where things get really interesting. As some of you will know, there have been dozens of UBI pilots over the years, and as most of you will know, the stimmy checks handed out during the pandemic were practically a form of UBI in themselves. Naturally, most UBI pilots have focused on poorer communities. As it so happens, 2 3-year UBI pilots published their results in July. One was conducted by a research firm backed by Sam Altman himself. The other was done by the National Bureau of Economic Research, a non-profit organization. What's interesting is that both pilots had the same key finding. When poorer people are given extra unconditional income, they use that added cash to work less. Put differently, they use that extra money to buy time. This is good news for the recipients of UBI, but bad news for overall economic productivity. More importantly, this phenomenon could cause UBI to fail. That's because if economic productivity declines due to people receiving UBI, then the government will have a harder time getting the taxes it needs to pay for UBI from both employers and employees. This would force it to print money. And as we all know, printing money causes inflation. The picture looks a bit different, though, when we expand this UBI to the general population. Whereas the poor use their pandemic stimulus to afford the bare necessities, it seems that more than half of the middle class use their stimmies to pay down debts, with the remainder spending it on goods and services. Look no further than the pandemic retail sales boom for evidence of that. Meanwhile, the wealthy seem to have used most of this money to invest in assets. Even though some folks in the middle and lower classes did the same, it didn't move the needle as much as advertised. Direct single stock ownership is one way to measure this, and it only rose from 15% to 21% during the pandemic. And some of you may also recall us doing a video about how much stimmy money went into crypto. A small fraction of the $270-odd billion that was handed out was thrown into the crypto market, around 58 million to be exact. It goes without saying this didn't really affect prices much, but boy did it make for a good narrative. Anyway, because all this de facto UBI during the pandemic was paid for using printed money, and because most of it was spent on goods and services provided by big brands, it resulted in record levels of inflation and even more extreme wealth concentration. Not a good outcome. So, what all this tells us then is that if UBI was ever to be introduced, it would need to be targeted at those who need it and done in a way that doesn't cause economic productivity to decline. The caveat is that this assumes that UBI will be needed to adjust to the next industrial revolution. It may not be. History suggests that all that will happen is that another link will be added to the chain of labour. To recap, the first industrial revolution involved adding machines to the mix. The second industrial revolution added more advanced machines to the mix. The third industrial revolution added computers to the mix. And this means it's likely that the fourth industrial revolution will just add AI, robotics, and gene editing to the mix in ways that we don't fully understand yet. It could be something as straightforward as humans leading teams of androids to do certain tasks, or even supervising them while they work on autopilot. There's just one problem though, and that's that even in this optimistic scenario, a large percentage of the population could still be left jobless. This is because of an uncomfortable truth that almost nobody talks about. Not everyone is smart, and the existing science suggests that intelligence is mostly genetic. Take a second to consider that the US military refuses to enlist anyone with an IQ lower than 85, as they can't find any task for them that doesn't require constant supervision. This suggests that people with an IQ of lower than 85 will have a hard time supervising androids and such. That is 15% of the population, by the way. Note that around 12.5% of the US population receives food subsidies. This is probably not a coincidence. In terms of raw numbers, that's tens of millions of people who will struggle to find work as jobs become more complex. Believe it or not, though, the bigger problem is that the population is declining. Besides the fact that fewer people means less production and consumption, fewer people also means fewer smart people overall. This means fewer people who can work the next generation of jobs. As entertaining and terrifying as it is to think about robots replacing humans, it probably won't happen in our lifetime. This means that the fourth industrial revolution may simultaneously result in millions of people losing their jobs, and there being millions of open positions that few people have the cognitive capacity to fill. The silver lining is that advancements in gene editing could make it possible to increase intelligence. But this would simultaneously open the Pandora's box of genetic engineering, a box that many would argue has already been opened. In case you missed the news, back in 2019, a Chinese scientist was arrested for trying to edit the genes of babies so that they would be resistant to illnesses like HIV. It's not far-fetched to assert that similar levels of genetic editing are already taking place in secret labs around the world. Many have claimed that there are human clones walking among us already. It would be crazy if the fourth industrial revolution ended up being driven by genetics instead of AI and robots. And yet it would somehow be exponentially saner than the idea that some AI-enabled robots are going to take all our jobs. Not only that, but it would probably be exponentially cheaper and easier to genetically modify current and future humans than create an army of advanced AI robots from scratch. As a cherry on top, there would also be no need for UBI because everyone would be able to work any job. The problem, though, is that this would also be exponentially more terrifying as the long-term consequences of this genetic engineering are completely unknown. Never mind the possibility that it could be used by the elites to ensure total control of the population at the genetic level, something they would love to be able to do. The most terrifying part of all, though, would be the fact that many of us would rush to get our genes spliced the moment the technology became available. Those of us who refuse could find ourselves falling further behind economically and socially, creating a truly new dimension of existential issues. For what it's worth, though, recent technological advancements have shown that the upper echelons of society aren't keen to share the spoils with the average person. This unwillingness could ensure the dystopian fourth industrial revolution they dream of never occurs, which could, at the end of the day, be good news. And that is the end of today's video. So, if you learned something new, smash that like button to let us know. If you want to keep learning, then subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. And if you want to help others learn about the nuances of UBI, then be sure to share this video with them. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. This is Guy, signing off.